The Honourable Whenua Mahuta.
Mr Speaker, I want to make a contribution in the second reading of the House, and as many in the House would know, that there are several things that Māori will be absolutely passionate about: women, children and land. We've debated the issues of women and children this afternoon. On the issue of land, it is I think of particular note that not since 1993 a serious attempt to try and look at land legislation and how it affects Māori has been approached. The way in which that has been done, it is arguable. Minister Finlayson identified the exposure draft process as a positive way of trying to float ideas for reform and to engage the public on that front. We would argue that while it might be a preferred process on paper, in reality, when you're dealing with a dense bill with some complexities, and especially around the issue of land, Māori land in particular, the exposure draft process confused many people who, one, may not have been engaged in their own land matters or have a very, with respect, low level of understanding in total of the Māori Land Court. Two, the way in which the consultation round or wānanga had been promoted, again, became very feisty. There were issues around levels of participation, level of real input and engagement into the process, but also death by iteration in the legislative process. So people were kind of catching up with iterations to the bill as the wānanga were going around, as things were being taken on board. So I think on a bill of this level of density, it would be arguable about whether or not the exposure process is useful. The Minister also identified the way in which the bill will seek to improve the participation of those disconnected, non-engaged landowners. As my colleague Meka Whaitiri has identified, much of the reliance of getting this right will fall to the Māori Land Service. Now, we had a very good presentation from those who are designing the process about what the intent is. And I want to acknowledge that, because if there's anything through this process where owners per se will derive a lot of value, it is actually in their support and assistance for their governance arrangements and decision making, the administrative aspects around succession. However, Labor is very, very sure as to why it wouldn't support this bill, because it's still in design mode. And in fact, the business case has not yet been approved by ministers, at least when we were briefed. While there has been a budget allocation for the establishment, fundamental to that is the establishment of the IT platform on which information is key and is yet to be determined. So the way in which LINZ tackles that process, again, yet to be determined. How the Māori Land Service will be established. Will it be, and we ask the question, a part of TPK, a part of the Māori Land Court, or a standalone? Still yet to be determined. Now, those things lead us to believe that while it is a very good idea, co-designing it in situ with legislative reform is probably not the best way. In fact, probably what could have been done is set up the Māori Land Service, keep aspects of the Māori Land Court chunking through as it has been, get the service up and running, because many would argue in favour of the service. We're not confident that in the short time frame leading into an election that the service will give landowners who are supposed to benefit from the service the greatest level of assurance. The other thing that the Minister identified was the role of the Minister of Māori Development to appoint Māori Land Court judges. Now, we understand what the convention is. In fact, Parekura Horomia appointed several of the current Māori Land Court judges that are currently sitting on the bench. However, what led us to think that it needed to be specified within this Act was changes to the Judicature Act. So we thought it's better to be clear and ensure that the Minister of Māori Development had a key role in identifying the skill and capability of those going to the bench of the Māori Land Court, and that be very well set out in the legislation and very specific. The other issues that the Minister raised in regards to those outstanding matters, which we all agree around the Select Committee would fundamentally improve the utilisation of Māori land, that is addressing the issue of rating of Māori land, landlocked lands and formalising paper roads, to name a few. Now, we were informed on the Select Committee that these are matters that still, there is an enabling work stream that is currently in progress to try and work this through. The only aspect of rating that has been incorporated into the legislation is around the Mangatu decision and formalising some of those adjustments, but nothing else. And so we're, I guess, to give assurance that the intent of the legislation around utilisation tackles those issues at the heart of what Māori landowners themselves have raised. Those are them, and they're outside of the bill. So again, question mark for us around those particular things. Mr. Speaker, coming back to the substantive issues around the Ture Whenua Māori, and I think my colleague, how she has set out the reason why Labour is taking the position it is, we had to balance up. Did the issue of utilisation go hand in hand with the primary responsibility to protect Māori land, and knowing the realities of what is out there in our own communities when we're talking about non-engaged or disconnected landowners and a high level of intensive support required to support them to be in control of their own decisions, we erred in their favour. We erred in their favour. Those Māori trusts that currently have governance arrangements that are currently working quite well. In fact, they informed the Select Committee we're doing quite well, thank you. Leave us alone. Those ones who are doing really well actually wanted exceptions in the legislation. And the only addition that we added to that was to Aropaki. But most Māori trusts who have got a trust order, who are happy with what they're doing, they kind of want to just tick over the way that they're doing. The other aspects of vulnerability that we felt, especially for those landowners who didn't have governance arrangements, were around the participating thresholds, but I am pleased, Minister, that you accepted the recommendations of the Select Committee around the second chance provision decisions and the protections there. We believe that that was a positive aspect to what was in the bill, and it gave greater confidence. And also the issues of ensuring that there were higher thresholds around revoking governance agreements, so you couldn't just do it because of a little tiff within the whānau or whatever. Anyway, that said, the committee spent a lot of time on the issue of succession. I think the substantial debate will come through the committee stages, and a lot of time on the issue of whāngai and the practical way in which that could and should be considered. Minister, you've commented on that. Can I assure you that the advice that we received from your officials was top class? In fact, the Māori Affairs Select Committee have probably recommended some of their templates for briefing to other groups who come before our committee. And actually New Plymouth District Council comes to mind. They could do well to follow the template that we had in this instance. The other, finally, the point that I would like to highlight is that nowhere within the bill was it contemplated in terms of identifying how and if the RMA and the changes to the Resource Management Act and Local Government Act could interlock with this legislation and may or may not impact on it, given that there have been changes that have been happening. To some extent, the Select Committee is responsible for that. We didn't pursue that perhaps with enough vigour, but I do want to identify that it is an issue, that it may be a future issue coming up when we think about the utilisation of Māori land and the way in which changes to other principal acts fundamentally impact on the way that this Act is read. Managed to get that all out of my all out. Now, in closing, can I thank our own Nuk Korako, because he has been highly constructive on this particular bill when we've had some very heated differences of views, especially towards the sharp end of the business stage of this process. He has facilitated the conversation in our Select Committee to a high degree. He has enabled us to pursue all the information requests, so there can be no criticism on that front. In the end, whether or not we agreed is a matter of our own determination. And our clerks of the committee, I believe, served us very well in helping us to co-construct our report that we are presenting here in the second reading. So, Mr Speaker, I know, like you know, that you can do the best that you can, and it is what it is. Labour will not be supporting this bill any further. There are some significant thresholds that we just can't see will benefit small landowners, those who have no governance arrangements, those who need the greatest support, because much of the solution sits in the Māori Land Service, which is still being co-designed. Kia ora.